Listen, Kevin Warren is a bad man. I think it's underappreciated how difficult it is to be a power conference commissioner when there's so much money put into these other schools, and when you have schools like Ohio State, Michigan, and Nebraska, and being able to put your foot down as such a new commissioner, I think is something you have to respect, even if you're not a huge fan of the conclusion that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 in particular has come to. We're going to talk about that at the top of the show here, not just Kevin Warren, but just where we stand in the world of college football. Among other things, I've read some stories that I want to touch on. Got some just some things I want to talk about when it comes to the college football side of things, and where we currently stand on August 12th at 11:04. First, let me set the agenda for you. Like I said, we're going to start the show with more college football, like we did on Monday. It's official. The Memphis Grizzlies have given up their 3.5 game lead. It didn't take very long, and now we've got a lot to talk about when it comes to that play-in tournament. We're less than 72 hours away from that play-in, and genuinely no idea who's going to actually be a part of it. You've got 3 teams that are tied for 9th. The Trailblazers are currently half a game ahead of all 3 of those teams, those 3 teams being the Grizzlies, Suns, and Spurs. So there's a lot going on, a lot of scenarios, a lot of situations. We can talk about that here at about 11:25. We'll do some FYI at the end of the show, and we'll get out of here. But as for right now, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are postponing all fall sports, college football. Listen, they've supplied the first really upsetting normal world. No, not first really upsetting. I take all of this with a grain of salt. First of all, there are many more important things that have been impacted here than college football. But college football, I don't know about you, but when things shut down in March, I didn't think at all that it would be worse in August, that we'd still really be dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, and that COVID-19 would be completely dictating the decision-making on a day-to-day basis on August 12th. I really thought that, even without a vaccine, that it would be under control enough. Now, I guess I had just too much faith in people, which is certainly a fair, maybe call me crazy for having some faith in people. I think that's certainly valid at this point, but I don't know. When things shut down on March 11th, when the NBA shut down on March 11th, by the end of that week when you had no more college basketball, I really thought that we weren't going to get to the point where we're talking about fall sports being canceled. You knew baseball was going to be pushed back, but I thought we would get to a point where it would be at least under control. And even if it was without fans, you'd be able to do things like play college football seasons. I really thought that. I wasn't sure that there was going to be able to be 80,000 people in a stadium, but I didn't think we'd get to the point that we have to cancel the college football season, or at least we'd get to the point where on August 12th we'd have 40% of the Power 5 conferences having postponed their college football season. Shouts to Nicole Auerbach. She's up there as one of the best sports reporters in this country right now. She's done a phenomenal job for The Athletic over the last few days. It's, not that Nicole Auerbach needs my approval in any way, shape, or form, but she's been on top of it. She was on NPR's First Up this morning. Everything you need to know is coming from Nicole. For the most part, there's, of course, lots of people involved in this, but she, as The Athletic's, national senior college football writer, she's been phenomenal. So shouts to her real quick. But as of right now, you got the Big Ten and the Pac-12 postponing fall sports. Big 12, ACC, and SEC are currently staying the course. Big 12 in particular, really, Big 12 and SEC really on top of really intent on staying the course. I think they'll ultimately get to the same spot. I just don't see a way that they don't, for a couple reasons here. You're risking a lot from a PR perspective when your counterparts in college football at the Power 5 level have come to the conclusion that it's not safe enough, because then if you push on and you continue to see COVID outbreaks in places that you've already seen COVID outbreaks, like the University of Texas, LSU, Clemson. If you see those things and something tragic happens during the season, and it happens after you have your counterparts of the same prestige actually making an opposite decision and saying that it's not safe enough, that's just really a bad look, in my opinion. It's not. I mean, I get it. I really do. I think there's a really interesting article in the Texas Tribune that we'll get to here in a few minutes, but it's essentially talking about the economic impact of college football, of losing college football on these small college football towns, specifically in Texas, is what the story is about. We'll get to that here in a few minutes. But right now it's 40-60 split between these Power 5 conferences. And you just also have to remember that decisions at the college level really have a domino effect, because everybody is impacted by the decisions that the others make, whether it be in really important games like these games between Power 5 conferences, or Power 5 games versus mid-major competition like the MAC. I mean, listen, the MAC making the decision to not play has started this domino effect. First of all, it made it so that nobody has to worry about being the first to do it. And there's just a lot of impact that, and they're all so intertwined, all of these conferences, that it makes it really hard. I mean, you saw, the SEC basically pleading with the ACC and other conferences and other teams to hold on and so that they could play football. It hasn't worked out great, and I still think, we'll get to the point where, and Nicole Auerbach said this on First Up this morning. She said, according to her sources, it's that they will likely get to the same decision. I'm sure that they're holding out for as long as they can to see if they can figure something out. But at this point, I think we're in a spot where it's just, I don't see it feasible, partly because of the state of coronavirus, partly because of the fact that if you've only got 60% of your Power 5 conferences in this thing, it makes it a whole lot more difficult to do, and a whole lot more difficult to pull off. Like I said right at the top, I'm really impressed by the new Big Ten commissioner. Kevin Warren's only been, he assumed responsibilities. He was named the next Big Ten commissioner back in 2019, took over as the commissioner in January of 2020. This is a very new job for this man still, and being a commissioner of a sports of a conference is difficult and has its challenges no matter where you're actually serving. But in a Power 5 in particular, a mid-major conference commissioner has to deal with things like trying to get enough money for their schools and really fighting to get their teams on TV, and really fighting to get their teams games against, meaningful games against other big schools, so on and so forth. The commissioner of a Power 5 conference, first of all, they're always in the spotlight. And every decision they make is completely blown up. Not necessarily out of proportion, but, Nebraska is still trending on Twitter. The Big Ten was trending on Twitter for multiple days. Everyone knows about every decision you make. And the other part of this is that there are very rich men that lead football programs, that lead basketball programs, and schools that are very, very wealthy and very well funded, and who really, really depend on college football and college basketball and, so on and so forth. A lot of schools depend on college football, but a lot of them come from Power 5 conferences. And so you're going to get a lot of pushback, and you've also just got guys that have a lot of say and a lot of influence in the sport. Now, whether that means, that doesn't really mean much for the decision making, but it does make it a little for the actual decision making. You don't have to jump through any more technical hurdles to make decisions like that. But what it does do is it makes you the bad guy. And then you have schools like Nebraska who are just basically standing on their porch out in Lincoln and flipping you off, saying we're extremely disappointed and we're going to try to switch conferences. And it shouts to Kevin Warren as the new guy. First of all, this is going to define his tenure as a Big Ten commissioner, first and foremost. But being able to stand up to his schools that early is I think really impressive and can't be. I don't think you can overstate how difficult that is when you're dealing with schools that make as much money as they're making off of football. My favorite part about Nebraska, let's talk about Nebraska for a second. My favorite part about Nebraska's statement is them saying, they're extremely disappointed, yada, yada, yada. But my favorite part about the statement is them saying that their athletes being within the rigorous protocol of Husker athletics is the safest place for the athletes, making it sound like that not having football means that they can't do those things. Now, I will admit I don't know what the current status of Nebraska's on-campus policies are. But assuming that those athletes are on campus, what's stopping you from still doing that? I mean, of course you have to say this. I'm not naive. You have to say that it's because of health and safety, not because of money. But not having a college football season is not stopping you from testing your athletes and making sure they're as safe as they can possibly be. It's not stopping you at all. It's not changing what you can or can't do for your athletes. It's just changing how much money you're making off your athletes. And to see the Big Ten commissioner, when asked about whether or not Nebraska could play football this fall, he said not and be a member of the Big Ten. And that's such a blunt and short and to the point statement from a new Big Ten commissioner saying, listen, this is how it's going to be. We'll keep your $50 cut and spread it with the teams and the schools that are, quote unquote, playing nice. But that's not a quote from him. But playing nice for lack of a better term. That's really hard to do, and it's not. He's setting a precedent here, or establishing himself as the dominant figure in the Big Ten, which is so important if you want to have any sort of control over your schools. Control isn't necessarily the right word there, but what he is setting a precedent here is that, listen, you're not gonna mess with me. You're not gonna push me around as the commissioner just because you're the big schools. I have control of a lot of the money here, and listen, you're not going to push me around, and this is the decision we've come to, and this is where the decision we're sticking with. I think it's Nebraska's making themselves look a little silly here, in my opinion. A little silly. Yes, you can be disappointed. Yes, you could want football to come back, but you just look like a child throwing a temper tantrum. And they truly don't understand why the Big Ten came to the decision that they've come to. That's the thing that drives me crazy about all of this, is that there are people who genuinely look like and sound like they don't understand what's happening here. They don't understand how you could ever possibly come to this conclusion. Listen, and I tweeted this the other day in regards to the Indy 500, but you're allowed to be sad. You're allowed to be disappointed. You're allowed to be, frustrated that there's going to be no college football season. But if you're genuinely enraged about the decision, and you're genuinely enraged and don't understand why they came to that conclusion, you just need to look in the mirror or read something, because it's so obvious that this is the right call. And believe me, in the boat with everybody that I'd like to see college football played. I said this on the last show. But I'm also in the boat that understands that this is not the best idea right now. It's really not. It's not the best idea at all. The Big Ten and the Pac-12 come to that conclusion. The SEC, the Big 12, and the ACC will eventually come to that conclusion. So here's what the next thing, and I saw on Twitter today, which is a good point, saying that the Big 12 and the Big 10 and the Pac-12 are only saying they're postponing to the spring so they can keep their athletes from transferring, which I'm sure there's some legitimacy to that. But the best thing for college football here would not to have a broken season where you're missing, frankly, the best conference in the country. You're missing Ohio State, the number 2 team in the AP poll. You're missing Michigan. You're missing Michigan State. You're missing Wisconsin. Throw all of those traditional powerhouse and college football brands in there. Missing those is not it. And now, starting in 4 months from now in January, starting football then, it's still far-fetched because it doesn't look like there's going to be a vaccine, and clearly this country can't handle getting the virus under control without a vaccine. But that would be, in my opinion, the best thing for college football, is to be, at the very least, the best case scenario would have been playing football this fall. A regular season, having a bowl season, having the college football playoff going on without a hitch. That would be the best case scenario. But I think the second best scenario is having a spring season that looks the exact same just in the spring. And I'm not going to act like that's an easy puzzle to put together. I know it's not. But I think it's a lot better than a broken season. And you can be mad at the Big Ten and the Pac-12 for making that a reality. But at the same time, you have to understand it. I think the best case scenario next is a full football season in the spring, and hoping that we can have some sort of normalcy. I think it's, I want to talk about this Texas Tribune article for a second here. It says that the top economists, said canceling football would be devastating to local businesses that rely on the huge influxes of cash from home games. Meanwhile, athletics officials weigh whether they can risk the health and welfare of student athletes. This is the biggest. This is the sort of tug of war that's going on here, and the tug of war that's going on. This is sort of a microcosm of what's going on in the entire country. But what's worth the risk is really the question that's being asked nowadays, because it's true that at some point we're going to have to go back to, and we have to a certain extent already, but in a perfect world, you shut down. I mean, I guess a world with a virus is not a perfect world, but in a perfect world, when there's a virus, you're able to shut everything down. Nobody loses any money. Nobody has any economic pressure to come back to school or sports or the bank or their law firm, whatever it might be. Nobody has any financial pressure to do those things, and you can just sit around and do nothing and social distance and until the virus is gone, until there's a vaccine, and then you go back to life and everything's the same. That's the perfect world. But unfortunately, and as you're seeing in this country, and so many people losing jobs and so many people, really trying to figure out where rent's going to come from, so on and so forth, at some point the country has to go back to work. In college football, and I say this still thinking that the right move is to cancel the college football season. I will debate that with anybody. I think that's the right move. I think this is ultimately putting student athletes at an unnecessary risk, because clearly what we've seen this summer is that it doesn't really work because there are spreads all over the place. But with that being said, this is a really interesting article about how difficult of a decision it actually is. I'm personally in the camp that student athletes' lives aren't worth it, because that's what we're putting at risk by playing college football. Whether you like it or not, that's what we're doing. But it's understandable why this is such a tough decision when you have cities like Waco, Texas, College Station. I'm not going to put Austin in there because Austin is one of the booming cities. At least it was prior to the pandemic, one of the booming cities in this country. But there are places in Texas that live on football, and then you throw in a place like West Virginia, when during football home games in Morgantown, West Virginia's football stadium is the largest city in West Virginia. Just the stadium is the largest city in West Virginia when there are home games for West Virginia football. So this is really impossible when it comes to trying to decide if it's worth these, because there are cities who are going to have to go into their major economic drivers, these football, for Waco, Fort Worth, College Station, Lubbock, Austin. Fort Worth and Austin are going to be fine, but some of these other places that really depend on the cash that comes from bars and restaurants and hotels and ticket sales, they really depend on these things. And those 6 or 7 home games a season, it's like the NCAA tournament. The NCAA tournament basically pays all of the NCAA's bills for the entire season. That football season can pay a lot of things, can keep the economy going, can put a lot of cash into the economy of places that don't get a lot of cheddar otherwise. So I get it. It's really tough to decide which one is more important. I like I said, I think athlete safety. I mean, yes, there's that argument that the putting them in the rigorous protocol is absolutely a pretty safe space to be, but you're still, you're one COVID diagnosis away from an entire position group, from an entire team, God forbid the entire other team, because you put one guy on the field that hasn't, you don't realize it because it's been 4 days since you tested. And then you're in a really sticky situation. At the end of the day, this is all about risk. Is it necessary? Is it unnecessary? And at the end of the day, it's a game and it's an unnecessary risk. And that's where I will sit for ever on this. There are ways for it to not be unnecessary and for the risk to be drastically lowered without a vaccine. There are ways to do that for sure. Europe is doing it right now. They've been playing sports there for a couple months now, really without a hitch. There's no vaccine, and New Zealand had its first cases in like 103 days. Now, it took 4 cases for them to basically shut down those places again, which is, I'm jealous. But there are ways to do it without a vaccine. So there are ways for this to be able to happen prior to a vaccine, whether that's in the spring or whenever it might be. But right now, the answer is that the risk is unnecessary based on how many cases there are in this country, and a lot of people saying it's not going to get better anytime soon. It's a really tough decision. I do applaud Kevin Warren for being as good of a whether you like Kevin Warren right now or not, he's been a strong leader for the Big Ten. And even if it wasn't a unanimous decision, he's standing by his decisions and really establishing himself as the leader of the Big Ten. But coming up next, the Grizzlies have coughed up that 8th seed. Took them 7 games, 3.5 game lead, gone, evaporated. They're not even in the 8th seed anymore. We'll talk about that, the playing games, those teams that are involved, the possible scenarios as all 4 teams play tomorrow. We'll talk about that on the JMULL Show next on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for making us part of your day. Twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live. This is the JMULL Show. Thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't checked out the site content over at 110sportsmedia.com, please do. There's a lot of good stuff up over there. Baseball, basketball, football. We got a lot going on over there. So please, if you don't mind checking it all out, that'd be very much appreciated. I spent a lot of time talking about how the Big 12 and the rest of the conferences are going to follow the Pac-12 and the Big 10. The Big 12 just released their plans to continue on with the Big 12 season, not just football, but everything else. I still am not sold that this will actually happen, but, because the Big 10 and the Pac-12 also laid out schedules. The Big 10 released a conference schedule, and less than a week later, it was for nothing, essentially. But so this just came out, just dropped 10:28 a.m. The Big 12 Board of Directors last evening agreed to proceed with plans for the fall sports season. I want to read you a couple of quotes. We'll start with the enhanced COVID-19 testing. Big 12, and this is a quote, Big 12 members have committed to enhancing COVID-19 testing that includes 3 tests per week in high-contact sports like football, volleyball, and soccer. Additionally, return-to-play protocols after positive occurrences will include an EKG, troponin blood test, echocardiogram, and cardiac MRI. Non-conference football opponents must also adhere to COVID-19 testing protocols that confirm to Big 12 standards during the weeks leading up to competition, end quote. I think a couple things here. 3 tests a week is a lot. That's a lot of tests. It's going to be hard to put a guy on the field that a man or woman on the athletic field that is going to be positive without knowing it. The window for that, I think, is pretty small with 3 tests a week. It'll be interesting to see what kind of teams they could get on their schedules. It does say at the bottom that volleyball and soccer matches will be limited to conference-only opponents. I think a lot of that is because, listen, volleyball and soccer more specifically, football and basketball dominated for the most part by Power 5 conference teams. When you get to the not the lesser, but the smaller sports, the less popular sports in this country, when at the college level, you get a lot more variation from where the best teams in the country come from, and soccer is one of those. You got teams from traditional mid-majors, your Western Michigans, your teams on the West Coast. The point being is that it puts a lot of pressure on those conferences because those protocols that the Big 12 have in place, those protocols, the Big East has a lot of, some good soccer teams. That's not technically a Power 5 conference. The Big 12 has a lot more money than pretty much every conference. And even for 1 week, so 3 tests in a week, for a soccer team that's got 22 people. Let's just put a number 22. 3 tests a week, 22 people. That's 66 tests in a week. I don't know what the financial side of things are for tests, but for a conference like, not the MAC, but like, say the Missouri Valley Conference, that's a lot of pressure on that conference for a week to put those kind of tests together. It just is. Whether it's logistically because they're testing once a week, so you're getting tests back a little slower. Whatever it might be, that puts a lot of pressure on them, and making it conference only in volleyball and just in general, volleyball and soccer programs aren't going to get a lot of money, relatively speaking. And so whether it's, the budget at that disposal can be a little bit more difficult to get those teams outside of the Big 12 to actually adhere to those guidelines. So you're sure when you make those schedules conference only, you're ensuring that every player is getting that same level of protocol. The conference is also moving forward with its revised 2020 football schedule. The 9+1 scheduling model features a September 9+1, meaning 9 conference games with 1 non-conference. The 9-1 scheduling model features the quote, a September 26th start date for conference play. Each team will have a minimum of 2 bye dates and potentially a third bye late in the season. Listen, we're talking about flexibility here in case you need to cancel a game, move it around. That's what we're talking about there. It allows for a lot of flexibility. The Dr. Pepper Big 12 championship game is tentatively scheduled for December 12th. All non-conference games must be completed before September 26th, and matchups will be announced by each individual conference member. Stadium capacities will be determined by each member institution in accordance with local or state health ordinances and working with government officials. So not only do we have football, at least right now, it seems like they're leaving it open-ended for fans, and now that doesn't leave a whole lot of room considering what a lot of the local and state rules are in most states right now. That doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room, but it also doesn't say... It also is not stating no fans, not a chance. It's not stating that either, which is, if nothing else, significant. Bob Bowlesby, the commissioner Ultimately, quote, ultimately, our student athletes have indicated their desire to compete in the sports they love this season, and it is up to all of us to deliver a safe, medically sound, and structured academic and athletic environment for accomplishing that outcome. We'll see if that's possible. I hope it is. I would love to see those sports. The Big 12, one of those conferences that's pretty strong in a lot of sports. And being able to see that actually take place would be very cool. I'm curious to see what the response is to from the SEC and the ACC, whether they were aware of this. I'm sure that they were. How they react to this in terms of if they follow suit, if they don't, so on and so forth. I'm interested to see how that all actually plays out. But there you go. They also said the board, quote, the board continues to believe that the health and well-being of our student athletes must guide all decisions. To that end, the board has consistently relied on the advice and counsel of top medical experts to determine the viability of available options. Our student athletes want to compete, and it is the board's collective opinion that sports can be conducted safely and in concert with the best interests of their well-being. If at any point our scientists and doctors conclude that our institutions cannot provide a safe and appropriate environment for our participants, we will change course. So it's also leaving that open-ended spot there as well. But there you go. There's the Big 12. We'll see in the next couple of days how this actually impacts the rest, how this actually impacts what's going on, with those other conferences. If it impacts what's going on with those other conferences, we will certainly see. But there you go. The Big 12 is Big 12 to continue fall sports as of 11:40 in August. August 12th, 11:40. Big 12 is pushing forward with sports with the seasons beginning on September 1st. But there you go. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back. I thought we were about to talk about the Grizzlies and the play-in in the West. We will do that here in a moment, but we'll take a quick break before we do that. You're watching the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us, making us a part of your day. 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports. The Memphis Grizzlies have given up their 8th seed. It's official. They're now tied with 3 other teams for 9th. The Grizzlies, the Suns, and the Spurs. And the Portland Trailblazers. The Portland Damian Lillard, 61 points last night. And a win over the Rockets. They are now alone by half a game in the 8th spot. Listen, here's where we are right now. Portland in the 8th seed, 19 and a half games back of first. 34 and 39. You got Memphis, Phoenix, and the Spurs. All but either 33 and 39 or 32 and 38. This race looks nothing like it was supposed to look. I really thought that the Grizzlies could hold on to their seed. That hasn't happened. They're 1-6 in the bubble. I don't think they've been horrible enough to be 1-6. I think they've had some unlucky moments, but nonetheless, they've failed to actually win games when it's close. They've made some really costly mistakes, specifically early in the playing games. Then they lose Jaren Jackson Jr. It's just been unlucky to a certain extent for Memphis, but they've also just not been good enough in a lot of ways. Giannis channeling his inner buck, his inner actual real animal buck, and headbutting Mo Wagner gives them a chance. I don't know. I don't know what the decision on Giannis is yet. But there's a chance he could not play in that game. The Bucks don't need anybody to play in that game, so maybe the Grizzlies have a chance to win that one because of that. I'm ultimately in the spot where I'd like to see the Portland and Phoenix in the playing game. I think that's fascinating. You got the team that's been easily the best team in the bubble in terms of record in the Suns. You've got the Trailblazers who competed for the 8th seed like you thought they would when they're finally healthy with Nurkic back in the lineup. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see both games. I think ultimately I want Portland in the 8th seed to play the Lakers in the first round. That's it's the best playing game, followed by what I would consider to be the best possible first round matchup. But listen, today's Wednesday. Everybody plays on Thursday. So by the end of Thursday, we'll know what the play-in looks like. The play-in games happen on Saturday and Sunday. The 8th seed has to win one of the 2 games, and the 9th seed will have to win 2 games in a row to actually take the 9 seed away from whoever that 8 is. But Memphis plays Milwaukee tomorrow. We want to talk about a couple things just with each of, San Antonio plays Utah. Utah is 9.5 is half a game back of Oklahoma City. The point being here that Utah still has stuff to play for, and Utah is the only team. Phoenix, Portland, and Memphis are playing teams that have not a whole lot to play for here. Literally nothing to play for here when it comes to seeding or what it could actually mean for playoff seeding or playoff matchups. Phoenix plays Dallas. Dallas is locked into that 7 seed on both sides. San Antonio plays Utah. You've got a Utah team that with a win and an Oklahoma City loss could jump back into 5th and play the Rockets. Now, there's an argument that you'd rather play Denver instead of the Rockets right now, but either way, you get to avoid the Clippers in the second round if you actually get to the second round. Portland plays Brooklyn. Brooklyn has secured the 7 seed. They're now 3.5 games up on Orlando. Orlando was only half a game back. They've been really disappointing, and the Nets with the G League team have stretched that lead out. They get to play the Raptors in the first round, so the Nets aren't playing for anything. Milwaukee's not playing for anything. So you've got a collection of games that, in theory, Phoenix could play a shell of the Dallas team. Portland could play Brooklyn. I mean, they don't have enough players to actually make a shell of their team. And then Memphis could be playing a shell of that Milwaukee team. There was a game already this season in the bubble when Giannis only played 16 minutes. if he does play, it could look something like that. There's no reason for him to go out and play 35 minutes. In terms of play-in scenarios, Portland gets the 8 seed with a win, or so they control their destiny, or all three, Memphis, Phoenix, and San Antonio, lose. Portland gets the 9 if 2 of Memphis, Phoenix, and San Antonio lose. So they either need a win, all 3 to lose. So it's looking really unlikely that Portland doesn't get one of the play-in spots. Of course, is up for in the air which spot they actually get, but it's looking pretty likely that they're going to actually be one of those play-in teams. Memphis gets the 8 seed with a win and a Portland loss, so Memphis still not all that far away from the 8 seed. There's not a whole lot that has to happen. Memphis gets the 9 with a win, or a Phoenix and San Antonio loss. Memphis needs both a win and Portland to get the 8 seed. If they win or Phoenix and San Antonio lose, they get the 9. Phoenix gets the 8 with a win and a Memphis and Portland loss. They get the 9 with a win and a Memphis or Portland loss. A Memphis or Portland loss. So they'll need both Memphis and Portland to lose to get the 8 with a win, and they'll need Memphis or Portland to lose with a win to get the 9 seed. San Antonio gets a win and all 3 other teams lose. They get the 8 seed, and they get the 9 seed if they win and 2 of those 3 teams lose. So definitely the biggest uphill climb here, and the team with the least control here is San Antonio. They need to get a win. If they lose, it doesn't matter, but if they need to get a win and at least 2 of those 3 teams need to lose for them to get a spot in the play-in, that doesn't, that's not out of the question, but I find it hard to believe that all of those things could happen. Listen, Damian Lillard is ridiculous. If you drop somebody on this earth, right before the bubble game started and you said, okay, who's the best player in the NBA? It'd be Damian Lillard. He's been absolutely ridiculous. 61 points last night. He seems, clearly he thinks that there are, he's still underappreciated, underrespected as one of the best players in the NBA. He's right up there with Steph Curry. He's the best point guard in the NBA. He's one of the 7 or 8 best players in the league right now. He's been absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal in the bubble, and you've got so many reasons to really like this Portland team. Of course, you've got CJ and Dame. You've got some depth down low with Zach Collins, Yusuf Nurkic, and Hassan Whiteside coming off the bench. Gary Trent Jr. has been the best three-point shooter in the bubble. Carmelo had 26 last night. He's playing pretty well. You've got other guys coming off the bench giving you minutes. It's a top 5 team in the West if they're healthy all season. I think it was Cowherd who said it on his show yesterday, but this is the best 8 seed of all time from a talent perspective. This is a team that just a team that looks very similar to the team that went to the Western Conference Finals last year. You can make an argument that they overachieved a little bit, but this is not an 8 seed talent team on paper, and they've shown that they're not actually an 8 seed talent when they're actually healthy. They're closer to a 5, closer to a 6, and as a result, you're essentially playing a team that is good enough to play you in the second round and the first round if you're the Lakers. If Portland actually takes care of business, it ends up with the 8 seed, I think they have to be the favorite here, especially with who they get to play. They get to play Brooklyn. Brooklyn's played well, but it's also Brooklyn, and you're not exactly going to bet on them to do anything significant here. And then with Memphis not playing super well, being injured, they're certainly not next up on that list. You got Phoenix, who's playing incredibly well. The Spurs doing the things that they should have done. They're beating the teams that they should. They're losing to the teams that they shouldn't beat. And as everybody, props to them. Pop has them in a place where they could theoretically get that a play-in spot. We're less than 72 hours away from, or roughly 72 hours away from those playing games starting. We still have no idea. That's awesome, because especially with how boring the Eastern Conference play-in was. You had no chance. The Wizards very quickly had no chance of getting anywhere close to the play-in game. but it's been an absolutely spectacular run for Portland and Phoenix. And now you've got, it was supposed to be the Pelicans and Portland threatening the Grizzlies for that 8 seed. You thought that the Grizzlies, when they were healthy, could hold on to that 8 seed with 3.5 games of a lead with only 8 games left to play. Instead, you've got Portland alone in 8th with a game left, and the Grizzlies are not tied with the Pelicans. They're tied with the Phoenix Suns and the San Antonio Spurs. That's not exactly what I thought was going to be happening when we got to the bubble. And certainly I don't think what a lot of people thought was going to be happening when we got to the bubble. We're not going to take a break before FYI. We're just going to jump right into it here. For your information, if you're just joining the show, if you haven't been on social media, the Big 12 continues. It will continue on with fall sports. Commissioner Bob Bowlesby said, ultimately, our student athletes have indicated their desire to compete in the sports they love this season, and it is up to all of us to deliver a safe, medically sound, and structured academic and athletic environment for accomplishing that outcome. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. It's a 9+1, 9 conference games, 1 non-conference game schedule. Volleyball and soccer only playing conference games. As of right now, things are supposed to get going up on September 1st, and we'll see how long they last. I hope they last. I hope it goes well. And I think if you're a Big 12, if you're really rooting hard for college football, you should really be rooting hard for the return of just people to college campuses to go well, because I think that has a really big impact on it as well. For your information, number 2, Kamala Harris is Joe Biden's running mate. Wanted to throw this in here. It's been months of talking about who Joe Biden's running mate might be. It is Harris. You can't get two Democrats that are all that, that are much more different. Biden, a 77-year-old man from Delaware, a white man from Delaware. Kamala Harris, a 55-year-old, half black, half Asian woman from California who's only 55 years old. But it's Biden and Harris versus Trump and Pence officially in the 2020 election. Deion Sanders is now a part of Barstool Sports. I don't know how I feel about that. That's a little silly, but and one of those things I never thought would be true. And then finally, USAM out at Bandon Dunes enters round of 64 today. Jackson, Mississippi's Wilson Furr carded one of the best rounds in a USAM ever, a 62, I believe, which is absolutely ridiculous. He was the stroke play medalist. The last time I checked, they were in a playoff for the final 3 spots in the playoff. You had 18 players, I believe, for the final 3 spots. Let's see. We've got, it has been done. You got Evan Katz, Cameron Sisk, and Aaron Dew, who have all qualified. Those 3 players making birdie on the 10th hole, the par 4 10th hole. It did go to the 11th hole, but you had Dew make a birdie on the 11th hole, and he is the last qualifier. So now you've got a round of 64 coming up today. Listen, I feel really bad for whoever has to play Cameron Sisk. It's not going to be Wilson Furr, I don't believe, because he qualified on the first playoff hole, so I don't think. No, he's going to be the 62 seed, but Cameron Sisk is a elite college golfer, elite amateur golfer, and having to pull that as the 64 seed would have been tough. But tomorrow, 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports. Touchline Talk with Josh Doring, 11 a.m. Eastern, Around the Bases with Chris Brown at 1 p.m. Eastern. If you haven't checked out all of this site content today, please do. There's a lot going on the site. I'll be back on Friday, same place, same time. Stay safe, and I'll see you then.